Second, good morning to you all. I'm Junko Yokota, past president of USBBY and also past jury member of the International Hans Christian Andersen Jury. I've been asked to be introducing our two guest speakers this morning, but also I wanted to recognize the fact that although I have been on the International Hans Christian Andersen Jury, and Susan Stan is currently a representative on the Hans Christian Andersen Jury, it is our U.S. Hans Christian Andersen Jury that makes the decisions to nominate the members today. So if you are a member of the Hans Christian Andersen Jury from the United States, if you would stand and be recognized. Okay, Natalie and all. Thank you. Because I think that our local committee has made, in fact, brilliant choices for us to be proud of. So today we welcome author and illustrator members of our nominations, and I'm happy to say that our first speaker this morning will be Lois Lowry. Having been on the jury, one of the pleasures of being a member where you get all these things sent to your house and you have piles of materials from winners all over the world, you realize that all around the world we have wonderful authors and illustrators creating books for children, and that we're very fortunate that in the United States we also have wonderful people that we can claim as being the winners from our hearts and our recommendations from the United States. Lois is one that, again, like many of our other people on our panel today, do not need any kind of recognition or any kind of introduction. Her works are important to all of us, but what I think when I look at all this array of books, and this is just a sampling of hers, of course, is that these are stories that long after I've read them, I often go back to, stories that linger in my mind, stories that linger in my heart. A quote of hers that I find to be particularly compelling is this one. I'll give you a moment. For me, this quote says so much about Lois. What it says is, she expects to engage our minds, she expects to engage our hearts, and she expects for us to think deeply about the things that she raises. So Lois Lowry, we welcome you to the stage.
Thank you. Great to be here with all of you this morning. Bunch of you are my friends. Ellis, I haven't seen for a long time, but when he greeted me this morning, we immediately started reminiscing about a time in Savannah, Georgia, probably 25 years ago. Chris and I didn't know we were supposed to make speeches this morning. We thought we were going to sit and answer questions, so we have probably, not with panic, but sat here trying to think of what we would say, and it occurred to me that the question people most often ask me recently is, what are you working on now? And that, thinking about that gave me the topic for what I can talk to you about for 15 minutes. 20 years ago, Houghton Mifflin published a kind of a memoir by me. It was called Looking Back. And it took this format. It was largely photographs, and they were from my childhood, and I was fortunate because I had a father who was a fantastic photographer, so I had a lot of good childhood photographs. But it attempted to tell a story about a photograph from my past and then link that to something I had later written in a book. And so quite recently, Houghton Mifflin told me they're going to republish that. It's now 20 years later, and they asked me to add 20 years worth of material to it. Quite an undertaking. And to come up with the photographs, once again, different photographs, to tell the stories about them and to try to link them to something I had written. And so I jotted quickly. I even had to borrow a pen. I didn't have one with me. I just mailed this into the publisher 2 days ago, this material, to try to remember what was in it and which of those linked photographs I could talk about here briefly this morning. The original book concluded with the death of my son 20 years ago. My son was an Air Force pilot who was killed in the military in 1995. And the second part of the book, I don't know if they're going to call it Looking Back Part 2, Looking Back Again, Looking Back and Back and Back. But the second part of the book begins, as each section does in the first part, with a quotation from one of my books. And it begins with a quotation from probably the first of the Anastasia books, of which there are a total of 9. But in the first one, her grandmother dies. And the child, who is 10, says to her father something like, I wish everybody who loves somebody else would die at exactly the same time. And her dad says something like, well, it doesn't happen that way very often. And so then it goes on to show a picture, and the picture is of my husband, Martin, in Iceland on a trip we took, and he's walking alone between 2 massive accumulations of rocks. And if you've been to Iceland, you probably know where this place is. I don't remember, but it's very bleak, very beautiful. And there he is, walking alone through this bleak, beautiful place. And it goes on to talk about his death 4.5 years ago, and the fact that it was as if he were going first on a journey. So it goes from there into the title of that section is Saying Goodbye. And it goes from there into other pictures of my own children as little ones running away from me, their feet in one picture off the ground, and a little discussion of how life consists of watching people go away from you, and sometimes in quite wonderful ways. The next section, I believe it's titled, Don't Get Soap in My Eyes, Please, uses a quotation also from one of the Anastasia books, but it's describing her little brother. And it says something like, Sam was in the bathtub, and he looked like an ordinary 2.5-year-old baby. He had curly brown hair, and he had soap suds in his ears, which was kind of cute, and he had a stomach with a poking out belly button. And then it goes on to show a picture of me at 2.5 in the bathtub. And it says, I was very skinny when I was 2.5, and I had blonde curls, not brown curls. And I don't remember if I had a poking out belly button or not, but it goes on to talk about playing in the bathtub. And then it says something like, I wish I'd brought this with me, I think the world would be a much better place. There would be no wars if everybody got into a big bathtub and played with the soap suds together. And then it says, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Censors will not like it. Then it goes on to talk about, there are a number of different sections. There's one that describes a scene, that the quote is from a scene in the book, the one I used old photographs in, The Silent Boy. And there is a scene which describes the interior of a barn. And then there's a photograph of me, contemporary photograph, in the barn of my house, which was built in 1768, the oldest house in Bridgeton, Maine. And it talks about my purchase of that house after I had grandchildren born in Maine, after Martin had died, and that in order to be closer to my grandchildren, I bought this lovely old house with this huge barn, and I just had to replace the roof. It was very expensive, but it talks about barns and the history that lives there in a house that's 200 years old, and how we become part of the history of the places that we are. There is another section which uses a quote from one of the Anastasia books when she says about herself, I'm wishy-washy. I can't make decisions. And then I just put that section in because I had a photograph that I so badly wanted to use. And it's a photograph of my own granddaughter. I have only one granddaughter, and she happens to live in Germany, so I don't see her as often as I would like. But I have a photograph of her at age 2.5. And she is holding a bottle of milk in her mouth, gripping it by the nipple. So it's dangling from her mouth, and in each hand she's holding a pacifier. And she looks completely torn by the decision-making in that process. Then, I'm not sure how personal or intimate one should be, but this is a personal and intimate group. So many of you, my close friends, or I feel that you are. And so I will go on to tell you the final section of this part 2 to the memoir. There is a quote, again, from an Anastasia book. They lend themselves so well to quotes. And in this particular scene, the child is 12, and a boy that she sort of doesn't like, but he's the only boy in her life at age 12. He calls her up and explains to her a very complicated formula that he's come up with. And he asks her to list her favorite, the number of her favorite TV channel, the date of her birthday, and a number of other numerical things. And then he equates that to the alphabet, and it comes out with the letters A and K. So he says, see, that means that we're meant for each other. Our futures will be together. And she hangs up the phone and says to herself in this passage, which I quoted, how on earth are you supposed to be able to tell the future? And why would you want to? If you could tell the future, there wouldn't be any surprises left. Okay, that's the quote, and I believe the section of that passage is called Surprises. And then the essay that accompanies it, filling in the most recent details of my life, are this. It says in June of 2015, so the most recent June, a man named Howard called and invited me to dinner. Howard is a doctor, his wife Jeanette, and he were friends of Martin's and mine, and Jeanette died the same time Martin did. And over dinner we talked about Martin and Jeanette and how we missed them, and we also talked a lot about traveling. Howard and Jeanette and Martin and I had traveled to a lot of the same places together. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. We had traveled a lot to the same places, but not together. We'd been at the same places, but at different times, and so we talked about trips to France, trips to Iceland, trips to Kenya. And then we began to talk about places we had never gotten to. And I said to Howard, I've always had a very weird fascination with Botswana. And he started to laugh. And he said, wait a minute. And he went into his office, which was nearby, and he came back with a handful of brochures about Botswana. He had just sent for these brochures about Botswana. And so we laughed about that. And so I said in this essay, if this were a novel, if this were a bad novel, I would say. And so we rode off into the sunset and went to Botswana together. But that is not the case, I said. And in a good novel, characters get to know one another and they find connections to one another, and the plot emerges gradually. So this plot also emerged gradually. And so now I will tell you the personal and intimate, not conclusion, but the next episode in the plot. I had a dinner party. I had friends there visiting from another state. They were staying at my house. I had a dinner party, invited local friends. I invited Howard to come. And when he arrived, he brought some papers, and he said, here, I'm going to leave these here. Look at them after the guests leave. So we had a lovely evening dinner party, and the guests left. Howard left. My overnight guests went off to the guest room to go to sleep, and so I picked up these papers and took them out to the screen porch and turned on the light out there. It was late at night, and opened them up. and they were 2 first-class tickets to Botswana. So this is after a long summer of not doing much work because I was falling in love. There you are. So that is a very personal little bit of my story. And perhaps all you need to know about me at this point. And the answer to what I'm working on now is I just finished the memoir thing, but now I'm working on my life at this point, I think. And so I'm going to shut up now because there will be time for you to ask questions and I can answer more specific questions. Oh, wait a minute. I just thought of something that I do want to tell you. Back to the bathroom sequence, the bathtub sequence. Me, 2.5 in the bathtub. The next picture is a scene from the set of the filming of The Giver. This was 2 years ago. They asked me to, if I would like to go to South Africa to watch the filming of that movie. And so I did that. I just stayed a week, and of course the filming took much longer than that. But during the week that I was there, they were filming the scene where there's an auditorium full of people, and on the stage there is a semicircle of chairs, and the Council of Elders are seated in those chairs. The elders were people of a certain age who had been recruited as extras to sit in those chairs in Cape Town and play those roles. And when I got there, Jeff Bridges asked me if I would like to be in the movie. And I said, in what capacity? And he said, you could be one of the elders. So I looked at the row of chairs there, and I looked at the camera, and I'd been aware during my several days there of how long that was taking to set that up, to arrange the lighting, to rehearse the scene. And those 12 people, all they did was sit there hour after hour, and it looked very boring. And so I said, thank you, no, I do not want to be in the movie. Then I said, but wait, because I had read the script. I said, the screenwriter left out the scene, which is in the book, where the boy, Jonas, bathes the old woman. I said, now if you had left that scene in, I could have played the role of the naked old lady in the bathtub. He knew I was just joking, and the scene is not in the screenplay, and it is not in the movie, and he did know I was joking. Okay, jump ahead now. That was in the fall of 2013. Jump ahead now to August of 2014. And we're in New York because the movie is opening in New York. And Jeff Bridges and I together are on the Charlie Rose show. There in front of, I don't know how large the audience is of the Charlie Rose show. Millions maybe, certainly thousands. Apropos of nothing, Bridges says to Charlie Rose, yes, Lois wanted to play the scene of she wanted to be the naked lady in the bathtub. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Okay, I'm going to shut up, and you can ask questions later, and Junko can ask questions as well, and we'll give Chris a turn to speak for a few minutes first. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois, for your remarks and for helping us recognize once again, really, your brilliance of your words and the ways in which you share stories with all of us. Our next person who's going to give us remarks is the person for which we have nominated the Illustrator Award, Chris Rushka, a person who has won numerous Caldecots, as Lois has won numerous Newberries, and again, a quote that gives us thought-provoking moment to think as we welcome Chris to the stage to make a few remarks about his being nominated as the USBBY nominee.
Thank you, Junko. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for this great honor. I've been an illustrator for well, I've been an illustrator for a long time. I've been a working illustrator in children's books for 25 years, and it's not something I ever thought would happen in my life, and it has become my life's work, and I'm thrilled that it has become that and that it is that. And as part of that life, I have been so fortunate and happy to meet other illustrators, writers, thinkers, educators, and a number of people have become important to me. Junko has been in and out of my life for probably 20 years. I don't remember the first time that Junko spoke to me, but it's been many years. So I think I would like to also speak a little bit about what I'm working on, as Lois did. And Lois, I recall, Lois won the Giver when I first won, or Lois won the Newbery for the Giver when I won a Caldecott honor for Yo Yes. And so I've always felt, thank you, I've always felt tied to Lois as well in a happy way. But the person I wanted to speak about is someone who I met very early on, and it came out of my book, Yo Yes, and that is Vera B. Williams, who was, she nominated Yo Yes for the Ezra Jack Keats Award, and you know, I knew who she was, and if you don't know Vera B. Williams, she wrote A Chair for My Mother and more. She's been a fantastic activist for children and for causes of peace and justice. And I've known her for many years, and I've seen her often just on the street. We used to bump into each other all the time. And last time was about 4 years ago. I was on my bike in Greenwich Village, and there was Vera. Hey, Chris! And so this summer, I got a phone call on my landline, something that is a rarity nowadays, and it was Vera. And she had called early in the afternoon and spoke to my wife, and my wife said, well, you can call Chris on his cell phone. No, I'd rather use this phone. And so I picked up the phone in the evening. She called again about 9 o'clock, and I said, hi, Vera, how is everything? And she said, oh, good and bad. The good part is I have this book I want to do. The bad part is I have cancer. So I said, oh, Vera, I'm so sorry. And so she went on to say, I've stopped taking medications. I'm in hospice. And to do this book, I just don't think I have the strength to do it myself. And she said to me, I want to just make a proposal to you, see what you think. And she then said, would you help me finish this book? And I said, well, of course. I'd love to do that, whatever I can do. She said, I live up in Narrowsburg, New York now, which is up on the Delaware River. It's about 2 hours from here. And so she's not in Greenwich Village. It's going to make it a little more complicated. And I said, oh, my brother-in-law, sister-in-law have a little house nearby. I can try to come up and see you there. So then Virginia Duncan, Vera's editor, sent me the text. I looked and, she said, do you want to work on this? I said, yeah, of course. I met with Virginia, and the new offices of HarperCollins are just up the street. And Virginia was kind of thinking, now, how's this going to go? And I thought, well, I'm not sure how this is going to go. How are you going to do this? And do you think you can do this? And I thought, well, we'll figure it out. So I had Virginia lay out the text that Vera had written. It was quite long, and she laid it out over 40 pages with Sylvie, the designer that Vera's worked with for many years. So then with that under my arm, I went up to Vera's in the middle of August. And rode up there with Vera's daughter, who's a psychiatrist, picked us up. My wife came along. And when Sarah, Vera's daughter, picked us up, I could tell she was like sizing me and Leidy up, like, what are you trying to ruin my mother's life? What is going on? What is this? You know, she's known Vera's hijinks for many years, so she was very skeptical. So we rode up, and I stepped into, when I entered the house, beautiful little house, and found Vera in the kitchen, and Vera looked like half her normal size. And she just looked tiny, and she was at the stove, and I thought, and when she turned to me, she just, completely looked completely a different person. I thought, my first thought was, this is not going to work. This has been a bad mistake. But before we knew it, Vera had made a beautiful little niçoise salad, and we went out and sat on the picnic table, and we talked. And Vera, the thing with, when she called me, her voice was completely her voice. And I said, "You sound so good." And she said, "Yeah, my voice hasn't been affected." So her voice was, and her mind was not affected. So her voice was so strong, it was just a shock to see her. But very soon I got over it. So my wife Leidy and Sarah took off and went swimming in the Delaware, and Vera and I worked, sat at her big table, and we just went through the dummy, and I thought, okay, now what? And we read each page, and Vera said, well, I think this would be nice if we had something like this here. And so then I started just drawing things on Post-its, and to work as an illustrator with another illustrator is very difficult because artists have egos and we have expressions, and it's, I didn't want to step on Vera's ego. I didn't know quite how much to draw, what to do. But I went ahead and did that, and then we looked at it and we thought 40 pages seems like an awful lot, and Vera was like, oh my God, that's too much work. So then overnight I squished everything together into 32 pages, and the next day we sat together again and worked. And on the first day, I just mentioned this, not out of gruesomeness, but just to kind of paint the scene. She and I were sitting at the table working very hard and gotten through everything. And I said, Vera, do you want to lie down? And she said, yeah, I'm getting a little tired. So I got up, and underneath her, suddenly, there was a big puddle of water. It was not urine or anything. I thought maybe that's what it was. It was water. And we looked down, we both looked at it, and she said, yeah, that's been happening to me a lot lately. Water would just pour out of her. And so we mopped up the water. And so then I had that, and we had a wonderful time. Sarah was convinced this might work, and Sarah, as we were leaving, said, you may have to do this book yourself. She could die any time. And I said, yeah, it's okay, whatever. So I then came back, and I drew a number of drawings, and was talking to Vera on the phone. And then 3 weeks later, I went back up again. Let's see, we had created this kind of a dummy. I brought it back to Virginia. Virginia looked at it, and she had some suggestions. So then I went back up with Vera, and we spent 2 long days together. And just sitting in chairs next to each other, drawing. And Vera has had a young assistant named Claudine, who's been helping her gather all of her things. She had a big show, has a big show right now up in Narrowsburg at the Arts Association. And so Claudine helped a little bit, and then Vera and I just sat and we drew, and Claudine said, Vera's been drawing like crazy, and she had drawn an enormous amount of stuff kind of based on things I had drawn, she had drawn, so then it was starting to, and initially she said, you draw Winka, the dog, you draw Daddy Albert, one of the characters, I'll draw this one, I'll draw that one, but I thought that would never work, but So I was trying to get Vera to really just draw, and she did. She just started drawing, and she sat in her chair. She stayed up all night, practically the day I was there, and she drew. And so our goal was to really get a dummy done and that I could bring back to Virginia. And we pretty much did, and we just kind of glued it together, brought it back. So this was a month ago, almost exactly. So I brought it back, showed it to Virginia, and then Virginia, and so there was, some thoughts about it, and talking to Virginia, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? Am I going to just paint it? How is this going to work? So Virginia, Sylvie, the designer, and I drove up on Monday this week to see Vera. Actually, I had meant to go up earlier. Vera was not feeling well, so I had gone up later. And the day that I went up, she had figured out this water problem and realized she had to keep her legs up. And so we had arranged a beautiful wicker chair on her gorgeous porch. And so that had really solved a lot of the problems. And so she was really able to work it for 2 hours at a time. And so we really kind of did amazing things. So anyway, on Monday we went up again, and there was Vera, and I was quite shocked. She looked quite a bit worse in the last 3 weeks. She was very, very thin now. Still feisty as ever, very thin, and had a lot of, discoloration in her skin. But we went through the book once more, and Virginia had some problems with the text and was gently trying to cut a lot of it out, and we just changed things. There were some imaginary passages that Vera really wanted, and we kind of came to a conclusion on that. And Sylvie bought a copying machine and brought it along, and so we, Sylvie, I, Virginia, and Vera just pieced together a new dummy and got it all together. So we just were up there for a day, and so now and all this time I should just mention, I would talk to Vera, how are you feeling about this? And she said, it's exciting. It's exciting to do a book. Excitement is what keeps you alive. Not forever, of course, but it keeps you alive. And she was really excited. And on Monday, her daughter and son were there, and she said again, it's exciting. And then we had this lovely lunch, and Merce, her son, said, let's have champagne to celebrate this. So we had champagne. And Vera said, I am such a lucky lady. I have this whole table full of people. She wasn't eating, but I got all these people around me. It's just how I like it. I'm so lucky all of you are here. So now, and I had done some paintings, and this was important for me. I did some paintings based on Vera's drawings, but they were my paintings. I was drawing, Vera was drawing, I was drawing, Vera was drawing. So now I painted from her paintings, and I was kind of hesitant to show them to her. And she was so happy. She said, oh, this is great. This is like magic. I draw, you paint. And so it was such a relief. I feel like I know how to move forward. So finally, let me just close. Yesterday I was downtown. There was a message on my machine. Vera had called, so I called Vera's number, and she has had a man living in her attic who lives there and has helped her in the evening, so she's not alone. And it was Michael. And Michael said, Vera passed away on Friday. So that's the news. And it's an amazing thing. She's fantastic. Anyway, I'm sorry. So anyway, it's been a fantastic, I was so stunned and yet kind of elated. So that's the news. Anyway, share that with you, Vera. She's a fantastic person, and I think she's an inspiration to me for sure. So that's my little story.
What's the name of it?
Oh, I should say the name is Home at Last.
Vera is someone who we have all admired, loved, and will miss. But she certainly has left behind a legacy for all of us.
She visited me at my house 2 summers ago. It's a nice connection.
And last week I saw her exhibition in Pennsylvania, where she came to the opening last week for her exhibition of her original artwork. With that, as something that will linger in our minds and hearts as well as others, this was not presented as a panel session because we have such different perspectives and things that we bring to this joint session on Hans Christian Andersen jury. But it became very clear to me as I listened to each one of them talk about from their hearts, what's on their minds and hearts as being the recipients of this big honor of being named the U.S. nominees for the Hans Christian Andersen Award, that their two comments had a lot in common for me as the listener. And here's how I would characterize it. As I listened to Lois, for whom many things have been very personal as well as broadly generalizable, I will never forget that at her Newbery acceptance for The Giver, she talked about her childhood in Japan, which of course is my own childhood and homeland. And coincidentally, it was Alan Say who received the Caldecott that year, and there were shivers throughout the room as we saw the intersections of these two talks that were prepared separately and yet had such connections. And again, I would say I hear connections between two what could seem to be separate nominations and yet similar nominations. For me, as I listen to Lois, she always asks us to look inward. She always asks us to inspect our own lives inside, to look for the insights that help us to look outward. And today, Chris, when he started, seemingly talked about others, talked about looking out to see what else is in the world around us, as he often does in his books, where he asks us to look outward, but also through what seems to be his playfulness, there's deep thought-provokingness that asks us to look inward. Many of the conversations we've had over the years have been precisely about that, looking out, looking in, inspecting ourselves while we look out at the world. Being nominated for the Hans Christian Andersen Award means that the United States, your home countries, have said, yes, these are the two people who we want the world to know even more about than they already know already. I mean, I have to say, already being translated into 30 languages doesn't seem like the world needs us to name them as being people we want the world to know about. But yes, we're full of pride today as we say USBBY has recognized them as being our nominees. My first question, as I would like to think as we look into the world, is what does it mean to you as being a nominee from the United States, but in an international sphere? What does it mean for you to be representing the United States within the larger IBBY world? Lois, do you mind starting with a
Oh
moment
gosh,
to think
that's
about
a
that?
tough question early in the morning, I think. But I was a very shy, introverted child. I'm still an introvert. I think probably most writers, perhaps most illustrators are as well. But I was caught in a family that my father was a career Army officer, so that we traveled a great deal. And when I was 11 years old, I was transported to Japan, a place that was completely foreign, of course, to me at that time. I incidentally, I went back to Japan just this past April. Tokyo has changed, hasn't it? But at any rate, one of the first things I did when I got to Tokyo was to find the American Library, where all the books from my childhood still resided in that place so far away in 1947. Tokyo was rubble. It had been badly bombed and burned. But here, nonetheless, were my old friends from home. the world, of course, has become so much smaller now. I zipped over to Japan in April. When I was there in the late 40s, I had grandparents living in Pennsylvania, and they would call maybe twice a year, a carefully prearranged phone call where we would say, what time is it there? What time is it here? And now, of course, I email back and forth. I mentioned my granddaughter growing up in Germany. I go over there very easily to visit her. So the world has become very much smaller. And as I've seen my books translated again and again, I just got a new batch in the mail. Sometimes I get one in the mail and I don't recognize the language, and I have to search the small print for where it was published and maybe recognize Bucharest, and then I know it's in Romanian. It just feels as though, to me, as though literature is the bond that brings us all together, the world of young people, whatever the languages. And so it's a great honor, of course, to be considered for this medal, but it's been an honor throughout my career to see my books go out there, to hear from kids in other countries. I get sometimes letters in a language I can't understand. French I can make out, anything else is very tough. But for a long time, until I moved back to Maine 2 years ago, I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You can find somebody to translate anything in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But at any rate, I love the fact that the world has grown smaller. Your turn, Chris.
Gotcha. Well, what it means to me is it's a great honor, and I would just say that I've always looked at books from around the world and have found great inspiration from books from Japan, China, especially Japan actually, and but also the European books. My mother's Viennese, so I grew up with German books, and so those were important to me. And so I've always kind of looked out of the United States, so I'm very happy to be representing the United States, I guess.
Thank you. I wish we could have longer and longer to talk to each other and more, but I'm going to bring some of our thoughts to conclusion as I look at our time today in thinking about the fact that perhaps Chris's very touching tribute to Vera does bring a nice closure to our morning's time together, in that Vera might have looked small and frail, but she was indeed very mighty.
She was a force.
And
No doubt.
her exhibition that showed very much about who she was within the inside that had such power, such force. May that be that thought that we take with us today.
Can I just very quickly tell a story that Vera told me? She was working on a book, I think it was her canoe book, which art she had lost. And was redoing all the art. In typical Vera fashion, she lost the art, so she had to redo the whole thing in 6 weeks. It was done. She had it all ready, but then she got on a bus for a demonstration in Washington. This was in the 80s, I think. And she, of course, got arrested and was sentenced to a month in jail. The book was due. The book was done, but it was due, and it was in her apartment. So she had to call from jail to her son to get the book and get the book to the publisher. And then her editor called her in jail. They worked, So that's Vera.
I gotta say, Vera loved being in jail.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
So in closing, it's clear that these are two people who, yes, they look inward. They ask all of us to look inward. Their words, their art, their books, their designs, everything comes together. Their lives through which they connect with others, but also with Vera looking down on all of us today and saying, go forth.
Home
Do
at
that which is
last.
good for all of our world. Look within you for the strength, and don't be held back. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you for being here to share with us your words of wisdom,
Thank
words
you.
of your heart. and we wish you the best of luck in the bigger world beyond USBBY as well.
Thank you. Thank you all.